Hi, and welcome everybody to How Sales Teams Can Become Experience Driven. I'm Samantha with the marketing department for SAP Litmus, and now I am pleased to introduce today's speaker. Jeannie Walters is the CEO and founder of Experience Investigators, and she's also just a longtime friend and partner of SAP Litmus. She's a regular contributor to our blog. She's a speaker at events such as this, both live and digital, and we are always thrilled to welcome her to the stage. So without further ado, Jeannie, I'll just hand it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to work with you. So thank you for inviting me back for this webinar. I'm very excited to share with you about sales training and customer experience and how we all have to be more experience driven. So thank you to everybody who's attending today. And this is a little bit about my firm, and I just share this so you know that I'm coming at this from a place where I've worked with a lot of different types of organizations. And I'll be honest, we all struggle with this. So if you're struggling with this a little bit, you are not alone. So let's go ahead and jump in. So first of all, let's talk about what is this thing that we call customer experience. It seems like it can be obvious, and yet if you ask 4 people in the room what it is, a lot of times you'll get different answers. And the way I want you to think about it today is that it's really a mix of the head and the heart. And what I mean by that is, yes, logically, there are a lot of experiences that happen throughout a customer journey, and a lot of times customer experience is defined as every single interaction between a brand and a customer. And while that's very true, what the end result of somebody's customer experience is about how they feel about those interactions. So if they have some great interactions throughout their customer journey, they're going to feel like they had a great experience. If not, well, you probably know the answer to that. They won't feel that great about it. And when we get right down to it, our brain is fascinating and it interprets everything for us. So as much as we want to be logical about this subject, it can be pretty challenging. And you've probably heard this term before. There's something called cognitive dissonance. And this is when you have a deeply held belief and somebody holds up a fact that disagrees with that belief. So if I showed you a picture of a cat right now and said, "Meet my dog Charlie," and acted like that was totally normal, your brain would literally start sending alarm bells off and saying, wait, that's not a cat, or that's not a dog, that's a cat. And that's called cognitive dissonance. And the reason I bring this up is because whenever we talk about customer experience, we have to remember that we are on the inside looking out when we are in our organizations. So we have certain deeply held beliefs about the people and the processes that we offer for our customers. So for example, if you have lunch with Sally from billing every day, and she's a lovely person, and you know how hard she works, and you're really good friends with Sally, and then you're looking at customer feedback, and you see that one customer said Sally was rude to them, you might be tempted to just say, no, that didn't happen. And your brain literally starts sending up those alarm bells saying, don't believe it, this is not true. So it's a challenge in customer experience work because we have to remember that our brain might not be telling us the truth all the time. Maybe Sally had a bad day and was rude to that customer. We have to accept that's part of the reality for that customer. Another thing that happens in our brains, 95% of our decision-making process is unconscious, and they're actually finding that this is even harder to figure out than they originally thought. But essentially what that means is that we make all these decisions logically, both from the corporate brand standpoint and from the customer standpoint. And then we decide later kind of why we made that decision. So we don't really know why customers make the decisions they do. And when they tell us about those decisions after the fact, they're actually rationalizing what they did. So they might not always know why they behave the way they behave, which also makes it challenging to figure out what's going on with customers. And emotion is 50% of the experience. This number is actually getting higher, and it's becoming higher with different generations as well. So it's becoming more of the experience. We as business people are often taught to ignore emotion. We're told to make things, logical and rational and look at things from a very objective standpoint. But the problem is we are all emotional creatures and customers are humans, even if you're in B2B. I do get asked that question, but yes, even if you're B2B, customers are human. And we have to remember how emotional everything is. And let's face it, it's hard work because it takes 12 positive experiences to overcome one negative experience. This number is also going up. The latest that I've seen is that for millennials, it takes 22 positive experiences to overcome one negative one, and they believe that number will go up even higher for the next generation. So I always say too that this isn't just for customer experience. Think about the relationships you have. Think about how that we all have kind of this emotional bank. And if we have enough deposits in that bank from a friendship or a partnership, then we'll forgive one or two negative experiences. If that bank account is depleted, then that one negative thing could be enough to push us over the edge and think this is not worth it. And in fact, they're finding that baby boomers are more likely to leave a brand after one negative experience than other generations. So there's all sorts of interesting research coming out about this stuff, but this is just to let you know, this is harder than we sometimes give it credit for. Understanding customers is no easy feat because they're human and we're human too. And our amygdala is this amazing part of our brain that spends 2/3 of its energy looking for negative stimuli. So as you're walking through the world, it's looking out for you, trying to protect you, but it's literally looking for negative stimuli. Your customers are the same. So if they're going through a process with your brand, any process, starting with sales all the way through the journey, that amygdala is going to be looking out for them. And so they're going to be looking for that negative stimuli, even if they don't know it. And our viewpoint is critical. As much as we try, and I'm a big believer in doing our very best to walk in our customers' shoes, we literally cannot do that. We cannot do anything except see things from our viewpoint and do our very best to have empathy and understanding for somebody else's viewpoint. But we can only see through our own two eyes. We can only interpret things through our lens. So the best thing we can do is build up that empathy muscle to really understand that we can't fully understand the customer, but we're going to do our darndest to make sure that we are showing empathy and doing our best to really understand as best we humanly can. And this is a formula that's been used for a while to really define what customer experience is. And the way that this is the one that I really like, because if you think about what customer experience is, it's all about the customer's perception minus expectation. Because if we are setting expectations, a customer is going to say whether they are delighted or disappointed based on if we've exceeded that expectation or if we have not met that expectation. That's all that is. Now, perception is because, well, I perceived that, yes, you met this expectation, but not in the way that I wanted you to. I had a different perception of what was going on. And all of this, of course, is multiplied by emotion. So customer experience is this crazy, like emotional thing that we all have that we try to make very logical. And it's really more challenging than we tend to give it credit for. It's worth it to look at things with this customer experience lens because it does mean growth. In the past year, experience-driven businesses increased revenue 1.4 times faster, and their customer lifetime value increased 1.6 times more. So this is real business with real results. And so that's why it's so important to really think about this. So I'm encouraged to see so many people on this webinar because that means that all of you are thinking this way, which is really exciting. And again, emotion is everything. So 70% of the customer's journey is dictated by how the customer feels they are being treated. Again, this number is going up. We are finding that people are reporting even higher numbers about how they feel their journey has gone and how that's so connected to emotion. And in the past, sales departments and salespeople and others might be sitting near each other and you would hear the emotion, you would understand it, you would talk about it. You'd say, wow, this person was really angry. That's because they heard this and we delivered this. What can we do about that? It happened kind of organically in some organizations, but it wasn't necessarily tied to any sort of system or database or anything like that. And so if Jerry was always the guy who could tell you how customers feel and Jerry leaves, well, then all of that knowledge goes with him. Now we're getting closer and closer to actual customer emotions because we have amazing technology today like text analytics and machine learning that can really tell us things like, you know what, this is a trend. people are starting to feel disappointed, so that you can go back and look at that and figure out, what can we do here? And as much as we put processes in place as business people, we love process, we put a process in place and say, customers, go this way. And of course, you can see here, customers will do what is best for them. They will find workarounds. They will find ways to kind of beat the system if the system is not working for them. And a lot of times we design our customer experience and our customer journey based on our org charts. And this is where we do things like, after we make a sale that took months, we then hand them off to somebody else. We built an entire relationship, and then we hand them off to account management without so much as a hello. And when that happens, and when it happens in a way that is not respectful of the customer relationship, that is chipping away at the relationship that we just built. That is turning one of those positive experiences into a potential negative one. So we really have to think about the customer journey from the customer's perspective. So instead of using words like marketing and sales, I encourage you to think about the journey from that customer perspective. So these are kind of the standard phases of an ideal customer journey. And I say standard because every organization, every industry has different phases of their own customer journey. And in some cases with B2B sales and things like that, onboarding can take months. So that might be its own phase. Or, you know, there might be a customer support phase that everybody has to go through. Whatever it is, this is just the ideal kind of standard phases. And it starts with awareness, when somebody becomes aware of your brand, and it goes all the way through advocacy, when they are telling other people proactively about your brand because they love their experience so much. But what we tend to do when we talk about sales, and specifically when we talk about sales training, is we tend to focus on the very early part of that journey, and we stop. We stop at buying. We stop at purchase. We say, this is how you get them in the door. And we focus on things like features and benefits training, but we're not really talking about the entire journey. And sales really has to set up a customer for success, and it has to set up the organization for success with long-term customers, with making sure that there's not a lot of churn. Because if sales is working their hardest and they're getting, you know, great numbers, everybody's meeting their quota, but half the customers that are already in their journey are leaving a year or two later, that might not be great. You have to really pay attention to churn rates and other things to make sure that sales is setting up the customer for success. So the first thing to do, I would say, absolutely know your customer experience. Know your customer experience from way beyond where you sell them. And what I mean by that is, if you are not actively involved with things like customer journey mapping, or sometimes people will have customer communication databases where you can look and see, okay, what are the typical ways that we reach out to customers? Really know that experience, because sales is about setting those expectations that lead to either delight or disappointment. That's a very blunt thing to say, I realize, but that is the truth. Whatever we are telling a customer in sales is a promise, because sales makes these promises. And 4 out of 5 customers have switched because of bad experience. 25% have defected after just one poor experience. And one of the ones I wanted to share as well is that 45% of customers, 45%, have reported that brands rarely live up to their promises. I think that's very telling, and it's something that we as an organizational focus should really look at. How can we make sure that we are living up to our promises? But remember, how accurate is our viewpoint? This is where we have to talk to customers. We have to find out what happened where you are disappointed now. What did you hear? What expectation was set, to make sure that we really understand? Because this poor guy, he keeps painting landscapes and he doesn't understand why there's this peak in his way when his giraffe friend paints these beautiful landscapes and doesn't have that. Of course, he doesn't recognize that's his own viewpoint. And we have to remember, we're that rhino. We have peaks in our landscape that we don't see. We don't understand that it's from our viewpoint. And that's why it's so important to connect customer feedback with sales and sales training. Because let's face it, we are often trained as customers to be defensive. And this is one of my favorite cartoons by Tom Fishburne. He actually has a book and a website called Marketunist, all about marketing comics. Highly recommend him. Go laugh if you're, I bet you can relate to a lot of these. But in this particular one, the large print giveth and the small print taketh away. And how many of us can relate to this? The large print is the billboard and the marketing and the promises that we all say, oh yeah, that's us. And then once we get there and we're ready to sign on the dotted line, we see all that fine print and think, uh-oh, what's going to happen? We've been trained as customers to be defensive. And so it's up to us to be as visible as we can, to have transparency with our customers earlier in the process. Because if we can show them that we are a transparent organization, that we are not afraid to walk through that fine print with them early in the process, we're going to build up that trust that, frankly, they are already not giving us. So we have to we start from a negative place with most customers and have to build up that trust. The second thing, remember, know your promises. Know your promises to your customers. And the question that I have is, can you articulate your customer experience mission? Now, this is something that most organizations don't have, but in my opinion, they truly need. And they truly need it because a customer experience mission is not the big poster on the wall, the vision, values, the 18 bullet points, all of those. Those are great. I'm glad your organization has them. But what I want to think about is, do you know exactly the mission that you're trying, the experience that you're trying to deliver for your customers? Because if you don't have this really clearly articulated in a way that people can internalize it, then you're going to create processes, you're going to hire people for roles and make these big decisions that don't necessarily all align in the same place for the customer. So the way you come up with your customer experience mission, first of all, understand what is our brand promise. It is kind of shocking when I go into organizations or I'm speaking to an audience and I say, how many people can tell me exactly what your brand promise is? Most of us can't. Most of us can't. And the brand promise is what you're putting out to the world and you're saying, this is who we are and what we deliver. So know what expectations you're setting for the customer with that brand promise. And that's where you can then establish core values for yourself and your team. That's great. But make sure you really understand what is that brand promise. But the flip side of this coin is that we have to remember what's in it for the customer. Because a lot of times we come up with these amazing brand promises, but they're more about us than about them. So if you're looking at a promise and you're thinking, yeah, that's more about our org chart or our products than it is about what our customers can actually do with those products, then you're kind of missing the mark on this. So make sure you understand what's in it for the customer. So don't get caught up in your own processes. Remember why customers love your brand. If you don't have a customer experience mission, go back and look at customer feedback and see specifically what do they say that they love about your brand. That's the experience you want to deliver. You want to make sure everybody is aligned with getting there with every customer, not just the few that maybe had it because they had the one great sales guy or they happened to live through, a software rollout relatively unscathed when other people had issues. You want to make sure that you look at exactly what kind of experience you want to deliver and what's in it for the customer. Is it that you can make them have better days? Is it that you can save them money? All of those things. But you want to make sure you're really clear on what that is. You also have to remember this is a promise. So can we always deliver on it? So we want to aim high, but be really careful here not to overpromise. If you say things like, we're going to be the best at blah, 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 well, I want you to rethink that a little bit because first of all, what does that really mean to be the best? And the second thing is you can be the best at being a Blockbuster Video. You can be the best at video rental until a Netflix comes along. And so if you are looking at just what that product and service is, then you might be missing the mark on what experience you really want to deliver. It's critical to get that outside-in perspective. So again, look at your customer feedback. Are you actually finding words like disappointed? If so, that gives you a lot of information. If they're using words like disappointed or didn't live up to my expectations, that tells you a lot about what you might be over-promising and not able to deliver on. So you want to make sure that your experience mission has that in mind. Don't overpromise. And finally, how do we want our customers to feel? We want our customers to feel a certain way. We don't want them to feel like great or excellent. We want them to feel safe, or we want them to feel supported, or we want them to feel like we are helping them achieve their greatest goals, whatever it is. But the other thing I want to stress here is that we have become so data-centric as business people that we often will not make decisions unless the data tells us something. I can't think of anybody better than sales leaders who are really connected with what prospects and customers are telling you about how they feel. And sometimes I've heard them say, you know what, we need to do something about this because our customers are starting to feel bad about it. And I have watched as leaders have said, oh, we should send out 20,000 surveys to find out. If we know that this is not the right way to treat people, that is enough information. That is enough information to go forward. And again, we haven't really been taught this stuff as business people, but the best organizations, they let this guide them. They say, you know what, we don't want our customers to feel this way anymore. We're going to change things here and now. And avoid changes that derail or compromise your mission. So the idea of having this mission is that you can bounce all these things against it. You can say, if we want to add another product, will that live up to our mission? If we want to create a new way of moving people from sales to account management, will that live up to our mission? How can we live up to our mission? Because you want this fully internalized throughout your organization. This is not just for customer-facing teams. This is not just for sales and support. This is for every single person in your organization. You want to communicate this mission through all departments. And I probably don't have to tell you that it takes a zillion repeats to get the message through. You want to make sure that this is something that is not just a poster on the wall. It's something that's active. It's something that you use to make those decisions. You can challenge each other with it and say, hey, is this living up to our mission? And this is so true for sales and sales training, because if you are only focused on acquisition, or if you're only focused on selling people on the latest, greatest upsell, that might not be living your mission. But if you say, you know what, this upsell is going to do for our customers, this upgrade is actually going to help them do their work faster. And that's one of the things we're trying to live up to. So if you can articulate it in a certain way, it helps people internalize so that they make better decisions. Because again, we're making judgment calls every single day in business. And if our people don't have this North Star, then I might think it's more important to not call a prospect back until I have the right information. So I might not call back for 3 days. If I know that one of our values and our mission is to always get back to people right away, is to, increase speed, then I will get back to them and I'll say, you know what, I don't have that information yet, but I'm going to get back to you tomorrow until I do. So those types of business decisions, judgment calls, we have to make sure are living up to the mission, because all internal processes must align with this too. So what that means is that if you are looking at rolling out a process and it's going to be cumbersome and you're going to have those customers using workarounds because they're going to do what's best for them, then that's going to get very conflicted, very confusing, and very chaotic for your customers. If you have a mission, you can say, you know what, we're going to start hiring differently. We're going to start creating job roles differently and job descriptions differently because we are going to align to this mission. And I want to share with you something I share with every audience that I work with, and that is our mission of my company. And the reason I share it with you is because I want you to know how we use it. So the mission that we have, and I've been in business about 11 years now, is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And the reason that's our mission, it sounds so simple. It's not even a full sentence. I totally recognize that. But the reason that this is our mission is because if we have clients who just want to check off the box, if they just want to do something because they think, oh, I'm supposed to do customer experience now, but we know it's actually not going to touch customers, it's not going to make their lives better, it's not going to create fewer ruined days for their customers, then we won't take the work. And on top of that, I always invite everybody who sees this to be a part of this with me. I start every staff meeting with it. We hire to this. Every single thing we do, this is something that we look to. And so even in sales, what we do is we look at, okay, what's happening here? How can we create fewer ruined days for our customers? And how can we make sure that when we help this person and this organization, that they're going to do the same? So I hope you're on this mission with me. And the other thing I want to talk about is knowing your results. We have so much data, right? I mean, how many of you think when I say the word data, you get like a little, little anxiety because you know that you have so much data, but it's sometimes hard to figure out what to do with all of that data. And one of the things that I get really excited about now is that we have tools that make it so much easier for all of us to have that visibility into other parts of the organization. So what I want you to think about is that with business results, of course, sales and sales training, we're going to look at how do you make those business results go up. That's absolutely number one. But how do you tie that back to your customer experience metrics? And this can include things like Net Promoter Score or NPS, customer satisfaction, customer effort score is another one people are using. So whatever your organization or whatever combination of customer experience metrics that your organization is using, make sure you have that visibility, because if you can really reach out and look to, okay, I'm noticing this trend. I'm noticing that NPS is going down. People are not willing to refer us as much as they used to be. What does that mean? Well, that means that, again, somehow we've lost some trust. It means that maybe we have not overcome some negative experiences. It means that maybe we have set those expectations early on in the process that we have not been able to live up to. So what I always say is go back on your customer journey, look at the phase before where you're having problems, and start sleuthing. Really look at what is going on here. Root cause analysis, all of those things can be really powerful, and some of you have amazing departments that do that work. But those of you who don't have all those resources, you can do this, I promise. If you look back on the customer journey and you make some calls even, or you look at customer feedback from that part of the journey, start looking for those words: disappointed, not meeting expectations, I thought this would work differently. Anything like that that tells you something went wrong in expectations. That means that you want to go back to sales, you want to go back to sales training, and you want to figure out how can we set expectations differently. The other powerful thing here is that all of these things have rich feedback from customers. So if you are looking for, okay, we know we're doing great, we are, making our quotas, we're doing awesome in sales, but at the same time, maybe things have changed. Maybe you haven't freshened up your training in a while. Go look at the feedback that customers are giving you about why they love your brand. Look at the NPS promoters that you have, who are the people who say, absolutely, I would recommend you to a friend or colleague. So if you have those people who are promoters for you, they can give you a lot of information as well, but you need visibility into these metrics in order to really get that rich feedback, connect emotionally with what's going on, and understand the journey end to end. And then you also want to look at those loyalty metrics. Those are a little different. We want to look at retention rates. We want to look at customer churn, customer lifetime value. If those are going up and down, those can give you a lot of information as well, because if you are, again, setting up sales so that you're getting all sorts of, great results in the beginning of the journey, and then maybe the customer lifetime value is going down, or maybe there's a lot of churn, we have to look at how we reward people and make sure that it's not just about that one part of the journey. We want to make sure that we're looking at the entire customer journey and connecting those dots. So in sales training, I think it's really important to explain these metrics, to explain that it's not just about getting that acquisition. It's about making sure we're setting that customer up for success throughout the journey so that they become one of those advocates for us, so that their customer lifetime value is as great as it can be. All of those things are super, super important, because this all comes down to building trust. This all comes down to building up on those positive moments and reinforcing that, yes, we live up to our promises. So in the sales journey, a lot of times we don't really recognize that every single promise that we make has to be fulfilled, because if it's not fulfilled, it's chipping away at that trust level. And so the more that we can build that trust in the beginning of the journey, then we have a little bit put into that emotional bank, right? Like we will then be able to overcome one or two negative experiences if we have enough of those positive experiences in that emotional bank. So I really encourage you as you go forward to really think about the entire journey of your customers. And if you start hearing words like buyer's journey, I would encourage you to really stretch that out and think about it's not the buyer's journey, it's the customer's journey. Yes, not every prospect will become a customer, but the way that you want to think about it is that that part of the journey, the awareness, the consideration, selection, and purchase, that's all part of the customer journey. If we start using words like buyer's journey, we tend to cut off the experience at that buy phase. So I talked a little fast. So we're to the point now where I would love questions if you have them. And I'd also love if you guys have things that are stories. You know, if you have things to tell me, I'm always curious to learn if this is your experience as well.
Well, and Jeannie, thank you. I'm just opening up. We do have questions. I may need to rely on Kia to open this because I had it before. We do have questions. While that's popping up for me, because we had a couple of really interesting and sophisticated questions, but let me do one that was chatted directly that I saw. And this is, you actually, I think, kind of touched on it, but maybe it just needs a little bit more attention when you were talking about communicating the mission through all departments. But the question is, should sales and customer-facing teams be trained separately on the customer experience promise, or is it something that should be done collectively for all groups in the organization?
That is such a good question. Okay, so a couple things. One is everybody in the organization should have basically an onboarding process that includes really being trained on the customer experience mission. But you're right to ask about the different groups because there are different ways that we use it in different groups. And so I would actually say that just like we've been talking about a lot with training today, I don't really believe in this like one-day training for the whole year. I think that training should be an ongoing piece of communication. It's part of a culture. And so the more that you can repeat this mission and also encourage engagement with it, so make sure that your people understand how to use it, that's really where the magic happens. And so while I think it's important that you make a commitment as an organization to have this and to really train to it, it's also important to identify the different ways that your different departments will use it. And saying that, I know some of you are thinking like, oh my gosh, well, that's not up to me. We're too big of a company and we've already got this vision value stuff. I've seen this work with just one department. So if you're a leader, go ahead and make an experience mission for your team. That can be really powerful. In fact, one time I saw this started in the call center of a trucking company of all things. They started this because they realized that they really were making different decisions when they got the calls into the call center when they had to make those judgment calls. So we created a customer experience mission for them and they put it up everywhere. We trained everybody in the call center on it. And then as they started using it, other people in the organization started realizing how powerful it was, and kind of by osmosis, it started spreading to the point where then leadership finally had to say, you know what, we have to do this for the whole organization. And so it can work in all these really organic ways, I guess. And one way too, I've seen this where people do it for themselves. They're like, if nobody else is going to do this, I'm going to write an experience mission for myself. What is the experience that I want to be held accountable to deliver? And that can be very powerful too. So there's no like perfect, you know, this is the way to do it. There's no one correct way to do this. I think the most important thing is that it gets used and engaged with on a regular basis. That's when I see it really become a tool that is super useful.
Yeah, that is absolutely. I mean, obviously singing our song over here, and we have another question that's kind of similar, Jeannie. And I'll, you may have to touch on some of the same things again, but this is a really great question. But it says, any tips for learning how a customer feels on the whole if we survey annually? And I'm going to give my feedback back on this one as well. But if we survey annually, it may come in a bad month. How do we understand a customer's average emotion, expectation, perception throughout the year? This helps protect against anecdotal evidence, i.e., I heard this person was once upset, and our own perception. So I'll quickly say to that, like, we would say, especially given, with our SAP Qualtrics solution or something like that, that asking for feedback annually is probably not enough, that we need to be doing that on a more regular, continuous basis, just like with training, where we need to be doing ongoing training. We need to ask for feedback throughout the relationship, not just once a year. So I'll take it from there on that. But and I'll happy to read the question again. It's a very deep question.
No, I think I see it here, but
oh yeah, okay.
So I totally agree with you. I think annual is really tough, and part of why it's tough is because, again, our brains are so funky that there's something called the peak end rule, which a lot of people may have heard of. But essentially, it's the idea that you may not remember every single interaction or every single day of a month. Let's say you commute every day the same way. You're not going to remember necessarily. If I say, remember how you drove to work last Wednesday? You'll be like, yeah, the way I always did, but you won't remember that specific day. But if you have a fender bender and I say, remember that day you had a fender bender, you're going to be like, yes, of course, because it was something different. It was a negative experience. So it literally, our memories categorize those things differently, and we house them in a different place in our brain. And so what that means for customer experience is that if I call you or survey you and say, how do you feel about us? I'm going to remember the peaks of both positive and negative. And if it's all going swimmingly, I might not really have an opinion, because yes, you're meeting my expectations, but it's fine. And so it's hard to gauge that emotional connection if you're only surveying once a year. Now, the point about anecdotal data, I'm going to say something a little unpopular, but I believe anecdotal data is still data. And no, you can't necessarily make an entire business decision if one customer says something or if they have a bad day, but it still gives you a little information. And so that can be the canary in the coal mine. So I would recommend that if you are seeing something, watch for, again, that cognitive dissonance. If you're seeing something and you're resisting it because you feel like, oh, that's just a small percentage of customers, well, those are still your customers, number one. And number two, if they are experiencing something that might get bigger over time, that gives you a chance to get ahead of a challenge or a crisis. And I've seen this happen both ways. I've seen this where they kind of catch that anecdotal information and they act on it. I've also seen where they don't act on it. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes it does turn into a bigger issue. So it's just, be aware that even though we think, well, that's only one customer, or that was only one time, or that's a fluke, it may not be, because we also hear from customers, customers who complain, even customers who respond to surveys are becoming kind of unique, because everybody's having some survey fatigue. And so it's really important to really use all the feedback mechanisms that you can to make sure that you're reaching out and you're getting the feedback from your customers. That's why I love text analytics so much, because it allows somebody to sit down and really tell you exactly what they're thinking. And text analytics makes the work of going through that so much better. You can get to that emotional sentiment instead of really relying on, okay, we've got 8 paragraphs from Complainer McGee, and now we have to decipher, is this the real deal? Do other people feel this way? Text analytics will tell you, like, a lot of people are using the word disappointed. That's an issue. So there are all sorts of tools now that make gathering that feedback so much more robust, and I would really encourage you to do that. I also, there's nothing wrong with picking up the phone and talking to a customer individually and finding out more about those specific situations that they tell you about.
Right, and that's where when you're talking about things like trust, it's sort of like, well, how do you measure trust? I mean, these things that seem a little bit pie in the sky, but it's that we do have technology now that you can. And how do you measure emotion and trust in these feelings that you addressed in your presentation? Well, there are actual statistical ways to do that now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that with some of the tools that are available, it's really it's gotten to the point where I'm kind of like, there's no excuse because now we have ways to do this that used to be really labor intensive, and now it's so powerful when you can really look at how people are feeling and the emotional connection that they have with your brand, and to your point, Sam, the trust level that can go a long, long way to tell you where you are with your customers.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to jump to the next question, Jeannie, if you're ready for it.
Sure.
This one, and again, I'm going to I'll briefly give sort of the SAP Litmus answer to this, but the question is, how can we apply this customer experience journey to our outside representatives who are independent organizations that sell our product? This is a very important question in the gig economy. And I don't know, maybe the person who sent the question, let's see, Al, if you don't mind further clarifying, it depends on whether those outside representatives are employees of the organization where you actually can make people do training. But in the gig economy, if they're gig workers or contractors or freelancers, pick your term. Oh, he said, okay, thanks, Al, not employees. Okay, thank you. So this is a really interesting thing now where, at least in the US, and I'm not sure what the laws in Europe are, but in the US, you cannot make people do training unless they're employees of the company. So Al, I'd recommend go take a look at the Litmus blog. We've written several pieces on this recently about there have to be other ways to incentivize non-employees to do the training, and there are ways to do that. And I'll let Jeannie take it from there, but do take a look at our blog, because this is a topic that we've really been talking about a lot lately.
Yeah, there's some great stuff out there on that, and it is a super important question. And I think there are a couple things that I have seen that help with that. One is you can actually kind of apply the journey mapping technique to the experience of your independent representatives. And what I mean by that is, if you understand their experience better, it allows you to be more proactive in basically making suggestions and recommendations. But to Sam's point, you may not be able to mandate that they go through training or things like that, but you can certainly offer things that then make their job a little easier. You can also absolutely share the mission with them, share that customer experience mission, and then explain how that fits into the customer journey and the choices that they make. I've seen that work as well. An advisory board is also a great way to get these people involved so that they feel like they're very engaged and that you can, they're kind of representatives where they can help you understand their experience that much more. So sometimes with journey mapping and customer journeys, we have to do kind of layers. We have to do several different versions to make sure we're really understanding everybody's unique journey and how they all overlap. And that can be a really powerful thing to do. But I would say absolutely, if they're selling a product of yours, share with them the mission of your organization and how that product fits into the journey, fits into your customer's journey. Help them engage with that on kind of that emotional level so that, again, you're giving them that North Star to really understand where they're going with it instead of just relying on kind of the process and the procedures. You're giving them something a little greater than themselves to really look to for when they make those judgment calls and when they represent you in the selling of that product. But to Sam's point, there are some things around this that you can mandate and there are some things that you can't. And so it's really important to understand those rules, but there's no harm in sharing this is who we are and this is what we believe.
And Al, our question asker, just followed up with an additional piece that will just further this conversation a little bit. He just wrote, the more we can do to help them be successful, the better for both organizations. Most reps have no idea how customer experience can help them.
Right.
And that's such an important, thank you for writing that out. That is one of the ways to incentivize, is that the training isn't something you have to do because it's awful and you have to, check these boxes. The training is designed so that you actually perform better in your job, whether you're a contractor or a full-time employee. The training is something that, as you just wrote, basically improves the relationship on all sides. And I'm not sure what your business is, your industry, but often if you can incentivize people by saying, do the training because, hey, you're going to make more money, or you're going to, you're going to, whatever that is, again, not knowing what your industry is, that is something that just on human nature, people want you because they're going to do better at what they're doing.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I think the other thing is, a lot of times the reason they became the representatives that they are is because they believed in the product, and so if you can make sure that they understand how that product fits into a customer's journey, that can make everything so much easier for them. That can make their own marketing and sales that much easier for them.
Yeah. And I know we do a lot of business for SAP Litmus. We have a lot of franchise businesses where this is a similar challenge, where, you have to train your franchisees on representing that brand. And the real motivation there is that by doing the training, by understanding the customer experience promise, your franchise is going to be more successful. Basically, end of day, you're going to make more money. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm keeping my eye on the clock, Jeannie, but let me give you another question that's popped up. So this is a good one. Should sales and other customer-facing teams have direct access to customer feedback, or should it be communicated via a manager?
Ooh, that is a good one. I'm a big believer in direct. I think, though, that the manager, of course, the leader, should really kind of be aware of the feedback coming in. And again, some of this depends on industry and other things. So I don't want to say like 100% of the time, because there are circumstances where it may make sense for the leader to kind of interpret that feedback. But if you're talking about a sophisticated sales team, then they're going to want that direct feedback. They're going to want to know, okay, how are we doing? How are we setting the stage for this customer journey, and how are we doing? And if they can also see that feedback of what's working, that will inform how they do their jobs better. And so I think that, most of the time it's great to have that direct feedback, but again, there are circumstances where it may make sense for the manager to see that and interpret it a little bit. But why wait? Why wait for the annual survey, or why wait for the monthly feedback call? Just like what they're saying about, the best places to work and what people are looking for. Nobody wants to wait for one day of the year to get all of their employee feedback. Like, nobody wants that. And the best organizations provide feedback on an ongoing basis so that we can all get better at what we do. And I think the same can be said for customer feedback as well.
Yeah, and then I think you just brought up a really important point, which is that I think, and even just some of the brain stuff that you were talking about early on in your presentation, where we tend to have a negative bias, let's not forget that customer feedback can be positive, and that we can train to the positive as well. You can train what's working really well. What is this, sale, in this particular context, we're talking about sales, but whatever support or customer facing person, what are they doing well that we can train other people to emulate?
Yes, that's absolutely
not always
true.
The negative.
And I think that's an excellent point, because one of the things that I always say too is that there are superstars among you, and they're doing their own thing just based on who they are, not what you've told them. But they're doing it in such a way that they're getting great results and everybody's happy and they're delivering a great customer experience. So you need to almost reverse engineer what they're doing and put it into training, and make sure that you're defining what those best practices are. Because I can't tell you how many times I'll be, working on a journey map or working with an advisory board or something, and I'll say, what did you like about the sales process? And a lot of customers will say, oh, it was Jerry. And they identify the person, and that's great, but we need to figure out what makes Jerry special. What is he actually doing? What are the behaviors and the actions that we want them to deliver on, and then go back and make sure we're training to that. So you bring up an excellent point that it is about the feedback. It's not about that it's always bad or always good. It's about really learning from it and taking the information that's there for the taking and then acting on it. And I think that's what's so frustrating for a lot of people, is that we have all these great resources, and some organizations just never act on all that information. And it's really there for the taking to make the customer experience better and to get better business results.
Yeah, and that's why we're talking about, even in the title of that's why we at SAP Litmus are talking about experience-driven training, because we're talking about prescribing training. Not everybody's at the same point on a team. Different people need different training to get up to, whatever their personal best performance level is. And that's what we're talking about, which is, prescribe something based on how you're going to help this person do better, whether it's that we're modeling it after someone's, like you're saying, really, great example of customer experience, and this person just always gets it done and they're a superstar, as you call it. And we model the organization to do more of that. And then also, okay, well, maybe there's some people on the team that need more product. If we're speaking about sales again specifically, need more product training. Okay, we just released a new product and they need, there's some weakness there, and we know that we need to fill those gaps. But it's full spectrum of having it based on real world experience from customers and from feedback that enables everybody to kind of get up on the same page.
Absolutely. That's so important. And I think that's another great example where you could do a journey map on, like, what is it like to train for this specific role? And then that gives you a guide to say, oh, you know what? We've noticed that people are weak here, or this type of person needs more help here. It will highlight those gaps for you to really dig in and make sure they're getting what they need in order to deliver a great experience.
Yeah, and some of, we're not going to get in the weeds on technology, but some of the stuff that we're doing with AI and with Qualtrics, that the data, as you pointed out in your presentation, that the data is there, and we can get the data. Now, how do we work with that data to actually use it in a way that affects CX?
Well, and that's the $1 million question, but I think it really is about connecting those dots, and it's about making sure that we're not just talking the talk, but we're walking the walk. And a lot of organizations love to collect feedback. and then they just keep collecting it, and it's a matter of really making sure that you're using the feedback for all of these different reasons.
And it just goes into the giant black hole of feedback.
Sometimes we feel that way as customers, right? Like, I've actually written on things like, I know you won't get back to me, but just to say they will.
Well, so Jeannie, we're almost at the closing minutes here. I think you probably want to put up your slide, if you have a contact information slide.
Yeah.
I think we have that for Litmus too, but folks, please reach out to Jeannie if you're looking for, individual consultation for your organization. We rely on her a lot for this advice. And reach out to her. Of course, we at SAP Litmus are here for your, thanks, Jeannie, for putting that one up, for your training needs. And we're always happy to have a chat. Our sales team are ready to talk with you about how we can help your organization improve performance with training. So Jeannie, I'm going to wrap it up. I don't know if you have any closing comments.
No, just thank you for all you're doing. I think it's really important to have people who are focused on experience-driven training and the customer experience overall. And so thank you for joining us, and thank you for being someone who cares about that. That's important.
And thank you. We always appreciate your work. And have a wonderful day, folks. We're going to sign off.
Thank you.
Bye.